Gurmahagut Cahirlock, Chair. Thank you very much for coming in here today. We're coming, I suppose, towards the end of our pre-legislative scrutiny of this bill, and with specific reference to the triple lock and its impact on neutrality. I want to summarise and ask you questions about it. So on the 1st of July, we had a number of very experienced military officers, some with a combined total of over 150 years of military service. And in our questioning of them, it was confirmed absolutely and categorically that any missions that are assigned to Irish troops outside of the UN Security Council mandate are likely to be peace enforcement or war fighting missions. So the days of peacekeeping in the old sense of having the consent of all of the belligerent parties, those days are over. In this new reality of a multipolar world and accelerating threats and hybrid threats, our troops will be engaged in peace enforcement almost exclusively, which is war fighting. And we gave the example of the UN mission to Korea, which turned into a full war with land invasion, and more recently the UN intervention in Afghanistan, which evolved into full spectrum combat operations. We also learned from the Department of Defence back in May, they confirmed that if the triple lock is removed and the legislation is enacted as drafted, that Irish troops could have been sent to invade Iraq back in 2003. The Department of Defence also confirmed that if the triple lock, if this legislation is enacted as it is written, that Irish troops could be sent to join any coalition of the willing of troops in a future environment. So, and then finally, just to frame this question, it was also confirmed here by my former colleagues and fellow veterans that indeed, such is the number of troops that Ireland can deploy meaningfully, which is battalion minus, or in fact just north of a company, that Irish troops sent into these peace enforcement or war-fighting scenarios will inevitably come under direct command of foreign higher formations. So in light of those findings that have been made very clear to the committee, do you think enacting, and this isn't an amendment of the triple lock, this is the removal of the triple lock, do you think it will fundamentally change the nature of Ireland's military service overseas and how we are perceived in the world? And does that have an impact on our neutrality?
Yes, I think that it will fundamentally change it, because it will mean that any mission that we've been invited to take part in that we haven't taken part in to date, because of the triple lock, we could take part in. And that's the case with the Iraq War, as Bernie Maguire confirmed on the first day. And you had the UK, in the case of Iraq, self-certifying that it complied with international law. The Attorney General was pressurised to provide legal advice saying that, which I've explained in our submission in some detail. The real concern with any possible war-fighting force we could take part in is the possibility of direct confrontation with nuclear-armed Russia. I mean, the EU Commission's Readiness 2030 white paper identified Russia as being really the key threat. That's consistent with rhetoric that has emanated from numerous EU figures, and that's the key factor behind this drive to militarise to accelerate EU militarisation, and everything in the EU's white paper is consistent with that. I mean, amongst other things, it calls for the acquisition of capabilities for high-intensity warfare, right? So that's not, a sort of peacekeeping mission out somewhere where you're simply playing a supervisory role. It's high-intensity warfare, like what they're seeing in Ukraine. It's about having the capacity to make deep precision strikes deep into enemy territory, which is, again, clearly targeted at a country like Russia with a vast landmass. So I think that would be the biggest concern. And it's a realistic concern, because there have been EU leaders, such as President Macron, who have called for direct deployment to Ukraine, and of course, Sir Keir Starmer's Coalition of the Willing. So I'll hand over to Niamh now.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on. I mean, I have a copy of the white paper here. I don't know if everyone here has read it. I recommend you all do read it. It is effectively a war plan. It sets out step by step the different stages that Europe will be taking between now and 2030 to engage in active war fighting. As you say, Senator, this language is terrifying. I mean, as we sit in this room, we're discussing removing, I mean, we should be discussing strengthening legislation to make sure we do not absolutely become involved in a war. And we're actually sitting here discussing how to remove legislation to permit that eventuality to actually happen. You know, have we lost our minds? We should be sitting here talking about how to strengthen our neutrality and keep ourselves out of war, and instead we're thinking, how can we distort our understanding of the UN Security Council vetoes so that we can permit Ireland to participate?
I just have two more questions for you, and I'm sorry to cut across you, my time is just so brief.
That's okay.
On the 29th of May, the Department of Defence confirmed very explicitly that the upper limit of 12 troops does not apply when Ireland requires to send our troops on a rescue mission, for example, to evacuate citizens, Irish citizens from a foreign airport. It does not apply when we send troops, if we wish to provide assistance to our neighbours and partners in relation to man-made or natural disasters, secondary to climate change and so on. So the Department of Defence set out quite clearly that the upper limit of 12 bears no relationship whatsoever to our ability to deploy troops in those situations. So the triple lock then has, would you agree, and I have a second question, that the triple lock has no bearing whatsoever on our agility or our capacity to respond as we see fit as crises arise on a case-by-case basis, that it only applies to formally mandated international missions, which is an entirely different matter. And then my last question is, and it's a two-parter, based on all of the evidence that we've heard here, it confirms from Ray Murphy, the Professor of Law, who came in here on the 12th of June, from Mr. Conway, who was here last week, any future government can send any number of Irish troops anywhere in the world by simple government majority. Do you think there should be safeguards put in place to replace the triple lock in that context? And then finally, do you think the Irish people, the citizens of this country, are ahead of the current government in terms of how they feel about this and its implications for our perceived neutrality?
And I will allow you to answer that as briefly as you can, but the time is up for Senator Clonan.
Maybe just very quickly on the 12 troops and the deployment. It's very clear in the Defence Amendment Act 2006 that troops can be sent overseas for evacuation missions. It's very clearly set out in law, so I agree with this. There's no limit. So we can participate in evacuation missions. That's allowed for in the Defence Amendment 2006 Act. On any future government, yes, this or any future government can send any number of troops anywhere with simple, dull majority vote, as you said. That's why this is terrifying, and that's why we need to be really serious about what we're talking about here. And then just on the Irish people being ahead, I mean, yes, and just in relation to this, on the 2030 readiness plan, when I participated in the Neutrality Roadshow, again, I spoke to hundreds of people, and there was a mother who came up to me and she had calculated the number of years as I was speaking, and she came up terrified. And she said, I'm just after realising my son will be 18 when this actually kicks off, when the 2030 plan is ready to go. My son will be 18 in 2030, and will he be sent off to war? And that is the reality, and that is why people in Ireland are ahead. Because it's about sending Irish people off to war. We need to be very clear on that.
I have to call your time. I've allowed you to answer that. Deputy Mayor O'Connell.